Anytime you mention Frank Jr., you gotta cross yourself.
He's a priest, ain't he? Father Frank Jr., your brother.
Your mother doesn't have too much to cross herself about these days.
You're so jealous of Frank Jr.
Oh, shut up, will you? Hey,
Where are you? Boom!
hey, the shirt, wash the shirt, stupid.
Oh, come on. Basta! All right, come on. Mangia. Eat, go ahead. Eat. I got more pork chops, more spaghetti.
What do you mean you got more pork chops? I'm out of work.
Yeah, well, as long as we got $1 left, we eat good in this house.
What?
Yeah, I might even get a job myself.
I tell you, Bill. 25 years in construction work, I always brought home a paycheck. What, 6, 7 months I'm out of work? And all of a sudden, what? You hit me. I'm talking back.
All right.
Talking about getting a job and hitting me.
All right. No hitting, no slapping at the dinner table. Okay, that's the rule. You was the one who's hitting.
You never hit me before. Never. Not in front of the kids. One pork chop! One!
Hey, Frank!
It's disgusting, right? Sick. We just wash the hair. You know, I work on my hair a long time, and you hit it. He hits my hair.
Take care of his hair. I'm gonna take a walk.
Don't you walk me to church later?
Didn't you go already today?
Yeah, confession. I gotta go back and pray for something.
For what?
I gotta pray for Father Frank Jr. to call me.
Why don't you call him direct?
I want him to call me. A son should call his mother.
Wait a minute. You going to church to have God make Frank Jr. call you?
Right.
I don't believe it. You know, you're turning God into a telephone operator.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me I have James. Say hello, James.
Hello.
Well, today, given the fact that we've started a new year, you can kind of say we turned a new leaf. We are going to give you a little bit of a palate cleanser as, you know, we're into our second week of the new year. And rather than talk about the usual Star Wars topics that we can't wait to return to because we love Star Wars or Star Trek or anything, you know, geeky related, we kind of making a slightly left turn, and we're going to talk about what we like to refer to as guilty pleasure movies, and specifically movies that could be considered musicals. Now, by musicals, we're kind of bending the term musicals a little bit because some of the movies that are included here are technically, you know, if you look at the definition of a musical, not musicals, but are movies that have very heavy musical numbers, or music is incorporated into it, into the storyline, so that we are kind of passing them off as musicals. And one of the reasons, or as far as I'm concerned, one of the reasons this is a guilty pleasure for me is because I am not a musical fan. The traditional, normal musicals that you would think of when you think of a musical, I kind of steer away from that as much as possible because I don't know about you, but every time, a story breaks into a song, it kind of breaks reality for me and it loses me. However, there are a few what I would consider musicals, and again, the term is very loose, that I love. And there are some that are kind of associated and they're kind of grouped together. And I might not necessarily love them, but we want to talk about them anyway because they kind of fall under that, subgenre, if you will. So let's begin with what I would say is one of my 3 favorite ones, and that is Saturday Night Fever. Now, before I give you my feedback on it, James, why don't you tell me about, when did you hear about this movie? When did you see it first and all that stuff?
Well, this movie became huge in late 1977. That was already a big year for movies, obviously, for all of us, because I had already seen Star Wars several times. But this movie got huge, and the reason for me was because I was a huge fan of John Travolta from Welcome Back, Kotter, and he played Vinnie Barbarino. And by that point, my parents knew anything he was in, I was probably going to want to see. So they had seen the movie, they loved it, and there was eventually a release of a PG version. The regular version is R. There's some heavy stuff in it. There's a rape, there's some language, there's some fighting, a little bit of nudity here and there. So they put out the PG version to allow for younger people like myself and probably teenagers. I was a little bit younger than that, but for teenagers, because the album was already huge. Everybody was talking about it. So by the time I saw it, I saw the PG version and I loved it. The whole movie is a pretty interesting story by itself. But the music with the Bee Gees and some of the other disco acts became a character itself that even though some songs can be taken out of some movies and you can still have the movie, you needed this music. This music made the era. This explained what was going on, and then that's what people started dancing. That was the biggest thing to the regular audience after that, and everybody was into disco at that point. And that's probably part of the problem. As great as this movie was and as great as the music is, we love disco, and I don't think there's a problem, but I think it eventually created a backlash that, it went up fast, but, at a certain point when everybody and their mothers doing disco started to lose its cachet, and, that's what led into other types of music like punk and new wave and whatever came after it,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I would also further say, as you mentioned, the music is so important to this film in a way, kind of like some of our modern films that we love. For example, Tron Legacy, where the music almost becomes a character and how important it is in terms of you couldn't imagine it without that particular track or that particular sound to it. And in this one, it's just incredible. You couldn't have those dance scenes, without the Bee Gees. I mean, they did make them bigger, gigantic superstars that they were. They made it even bigger. But my particular introduction to the film, it wasn't so much when the movie came out because I was too young to see it. We didn't have, you mentioned the PG version. Well, at the time, we're talking about mid to late 70s, I was living in Uruguay, so I was too young to go see it. We didn't have a PG version. So the R-rated was the only, or the equivalent of the R-rating was the only one that was available. But the music was so popular that it was on the radio stations all the time, and I absolutely loved it. I don't remember if I've ever told this story before. I might have, I'm not sure. But I love the music so much that I wanted to buy the record. And I think that might have been the first record, the first vinyl LP that I've ever bought. And the catch was that it was expensive. And there was a way of buying records back then, which is a weird way if you think about it, where you could buy a record, but you could have it discounted if you don't include the cover, the actual sleeve where the vinyl comes. So, all the artwork and stuff. So I remember I ended up buying the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, just the vinyl LPs without the cover. And I would, play them to death, but I really didn't know the movie. I couldn't even look at the pictures because I didn't have the cover. I couldn't afford the cover. How sad is that?
Yeah, and you didn't have the internet to go look it up to see what you were missing.
Internet? What the hell is that?
But you know what's funny? We love this movie so much. And the soundtrack, I guess my parents as well. We had this on vinyl. We definitely had it on 8-track, which is something that many in our audience probably never even saw. And ultimately, I remember getting it on cassette and CD. So I probably had at least 4 versions of this. And that doesn't count the eventual DVD and VHS or Laserdisc, those versions too.
Well, of course.
So while we're calling this, there's nothing bad about this one. This is, though, just what led us into these kind of movies, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be. You could kind of say it was the gateway. It was a gateway movie.
This is our gateway drug.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, John Travolta.
No, I completely agree. Eventually, I ended up buying the CD CD like you said, and not until I would say within the last 10 years maybe, I finally found a vinyl full version of the soundtrack that I have framed now in my office because it's like, wow, this is the thing I couldn't afford back when I was, 6 years old. I have it now, which
You're
is worth
a baller
probably,
now. You're a big shot.
Oh yeah, Mr. Big Shot with its $6 LP on my wall with these days. Now, why don't we talk a little bit about how, for example, the Bee Gees kind of catapulted off this film into what I guess was supposed to be a bigger success in the film industry, with their music being brought to film with the Sgt. Pepper film.
Well, the funny thing is, one of the producers of the movie is Robert Stigwood, and he was the manager of the Bee Gees. And after this was huge, the Bee Gees were on top of the world, and he was pretty powerful. And he got, however it happened, he got versions of Sgt. Pepper's and used it as a vehicle for the Bee Gees to make a movie.
Now, this is the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's, right?
That's right. Redoing the Beatles' music. And it was just basically, it was basically kismet that the Beatles music, the Bee Gees, Bigger Than Life, Stigwood is one of the tops in the music industry. Now he's big in the movie industry. And what could go wrong? Well, the trouble is, with this movie, everything looks good on paper. That how could it go bad? But unfortunately, it just didn't turn out that way. It was,
but it's a straight musical. It's a straight musical. It's not.
It's basically
like
a story.
Fever.
It's basically a story about the Hendersons and Billy Shears being played by the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton. And Peter Frampton at this point was huge. He had one of the biggest albums ever at that point. And everybody wanted to be involved. George Burns is in it. Aerosmith is in it. Steve Martin is even in it. It's just so unbelievable how great it could have been in a way.
Sounds like Battle of the Network Stars.
Yeah, and at the time I saw this movie, and I saw it with some friends. My dad picked us up, and he said, as any dad would, well, what did you think of the movie? And I recall saying at the time, I liked it as much as Star Wars, which is unbelievably ridiculous at this point in our lives. But at the time, the music really came across great. And, if you didn't think too much about the story, maybe it wasn't so bad when you were a kid.
Wow.
So looking back at it now, more recently, the music still holds up in some cases.
Yep.
There's some weird versions, the Steve Martin doing his song and Alice Cooper. It's just a little. Billy Preston's in it. He was actually the fifth Beatle for about 5 minutes. So, there's that pedigree. But it just... The story it's like a sea-level story, and it's put together. It's almost like halfway through they realize, yeah, we don't have very much here, so let's just wrap this up, sell a record or two, and we can move
sell
on.
a record, yeah, exactly.
And sadly, it's just recently Robert Stigwood died, and he had talked about a lot of this stuff, and he was involved. He wound up having a lot of impact. He did Jesus Christ Superstar, which is also heavy music, stuff like that. So he was in the right ballpark, Hair, things like that. Unfortunately, this just didn't make it. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch even with the nostalgia of some of the guys in it.
Oh, yeah. Well, another group that was huge in the 70s that, again, talk about a guilty pleasure, that tried to capitalize, into the movie industry, I guess, possibly, trying to mimic, the success of Saturday Night Fever. And at the time, like you said, on paper, the success of Sgt. Pepper is the Village People. They participated in a movie called Can't Stop the Music, which... If Saturday Night Fever is an A movie and Sgt. Pepper is a B movie, this is definitely in the C category.
Yeah, this was basically an origin story, as people are calling it now, of the Village People. Now, the Village People got pretty big in the late 70s and early 80s. And by big, I mean, the music was everywhere. They were on the cover of magazines. At the time, there really wasn't more than that. Like, that was it. And they, and so somebody put together this idea for this movie, and it was directed by Nancy Walker, who people know of a certain age, either as Rhoda's mother or
really
Rosie, the waitress from the diner, when she did the
quicker picker-upper.
The quicker picker-upper, exactly. So you wouldn't think of her as a director, and after you watch this, you probably know why. But no, she didn't do a terrible job. The funny thing is, it had the right pieces. Once again, it had the pieces to be fun and exciting. There's a young Steve Guttenberg is in it.
Steve Guttenberg, who, right before he broke out, in the 80s with the Police Academy movies and Cocoon and all that, and Three Men and a Baby. Yeah.
Valerie Perrine's in it. She's huge, and she's coming off of Superman.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, Bruce Jenner is in it. And now, in this movie, literally Bruce Jenner is the straight man. I mean, he is playing a character who's just a lawyer from out of town.
Yeah,
he winds
like
up,
a guy
he winds
in a
up
suit.
stumbling into this while the movie is going on of how the Village People, a fictional account of how they came together and to form a group. These other characters stumble into it. But again, as the straight man, maybe it was a shape of things to come. But for Caitlyn Jenner, who was huge this past year, but they really dressed Bruce up in some interesting clothing. I mean, at one point he's in short shorts that would make Richard Simmons blush, and a belly shirt, like a tight half shirt. Now, Bruce Jenner,
let's keep in mind he's not playing a gay character, but they do dress him up in these bizarre
This is supposedly the way the times are, I suppose. The way men are dressing now. Bruce Jenner is huge. He's at the top of. He had just recently in 1976 won the gold medal in men's decathlon. This is like one of the most manly men of his era. He's a pretty good looking guy. He winds up, he can act. He winds up being in Chips later on. He takes over for one of the guys.
That's right. That's right.
He's, an actor, a good-looking guy, everything, blah, blah, blah. And, so everybody's probably thinking, like, well, this can't lose. We got all these great guys and the Village People.
Right. But again, you're dealing with a musical, so it's not a serious film in a long shot. It's a comedy, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, literally, at the time, all of the Village People music that's huge winds up in this movie. And, in the Navy and Macho Man are not there because they might have not been out yet, at that point. But I look back at it now. I recently tried to watch it, and I've talked to you a lot about it, and I wanted people to see it, especially in light of how, this isn't just Bruce Jenner from the Kardashian dad. This is Bruce Jenner when he was at his peak, and he was somebody. And now, even for nostalgia and to see what Caitlyn was up to before, it's a little rough. It's hard. It's just hard. I mean, it won so many worst everything of that era, and it's out there. You guys can see it on YouTube, and I think you can see it sometimes on HBO or one of these type of
or Netflix. You could just order. That's how I ended up watching
it. That's right. Yeah, and this was not put out just quite right, and whatever. I mean, I love it. I love it for the music. I love the Village People. I think the Village People ran into some trouble. I don't know if it was because it was perceived that they were gay or something, which seems a little unlikely because there were so many gay acts, gay musicians.
That was their shtick.
Yeah, it seems like something just happened and the Village People lost favor, and this movie came out just a little after they were as hot as they were. And sometimes that happens in the movie business. A good idea comes out just a little bit too, it takes just a little bit too long to put together, and by then, it falls apart. But
yeah, they were still popular. I remember in the early 80s, but that was the end of it. Their heyday was in the 70s, because I remember in the 80s I used to watch Solid Gold, and Solid Gold would have them on still every now and then, but then they kind of disappeared. They kind of went away. But it's funny because nowadays, some of the members that are still around, sometimes they appear, or they make appearances here or there. It's like, oh yeah, he was one of the Village People. It's like, really, were you one? Because I remember there was a point, I think, where they kind of, like certain characters became other characters. And
Victor Willis was the original lead singer, and he left because he was straight. And the group, I mean, there's various different reasons why he could have left, but, he was straight. He kind of wanted to be who he was, and the band was starting to get a following and different type of, idea of who the band was. So he quit. They had a new lead singer, which, eventually the main guys came and went. And, I don't even know if Felipe lasted quite a while. I actually met, believe it or not, a couple of them. I think Felipe lasted a while, and a couple of the other guys were there. I don't remember everybody's name off the top of my head. But sadly, some of the guys passed away, and it just became a little bit... I think there's a group probably right now that perform as the Village People someplace, perhaps, but it's not the guys that, I don't think it's the guys that we know. Everybody's kind of gone, and,
Well, jumping to a more modern film, it's kind of a little old nowadays, but it's more modern than the 70s at least. And I think you mentioned that in a way, it's kind of like a way of kind of retelling one of these origin stories too, is Spice World, which I know you kind of liked it.
Yeah, I mean, here's my taste in music and movies, I guess, when it comes down to it. But yeah, Spice World was, again, a fictional retelling of the group's origin. And the Spice Girls were at the height of their popularity. And it turned out that this was really a slick, well-made version of the soundtrack and of the movie. But it came to a point where it was trying to be too many things. It was trying to appeal to the young girls in the audience. It was trying to appeal to adults. It was trying to probably appeal to like a gay segment of the audience that were big fans of the Spice Girls. And it just didn't work on almost any level. And the funny thing is, it was packed with talent again. It had Roger Moore. I mean, that's James Bond. It had Richard E. Grant, who's very popular. It had Meatloaf in it. It turns out Alan Cummings and George Wendt are in it. It's just, there are so many people in it, and it turned to be a little weak. The story started to fall apart. The concert scenes were shot great. They're like music videos. The Spice Girls looked pretty darn good in it, if that was your cup of tea. And it just didn't go anywhere afterwards, sadly. It kind of fell apart. And like The Village People movie, it didn't take off. It made some money because of the era. They put a soundtrack out. It was basically like their next album of new songs, which are songs that appear in the movie. But, it's not going to ever be considered classic.
Well, from a more modern one to one that's even older than all the ones we talked about so far, I have to bring up the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, tell me how you feel about it, because I know how important this movie is to a lot of people that are into these type of musical films. And I gave it the good old honest, college try, and I cannot get into this movie no matter what I do. And I know that they have the midnight screenings and the people come dressed up and all that stuff. And I cannot get through this movie. It just does not do anything for me.
It's funny you mentioned college try, because obviously everybody knew Rocky. Well, around that era, it actually came out a little bit before, like a year, maybe less than a year before Rocky. But anyway, so in my mind, Rocky, but it's Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, this is 1975.
I heard about it when it first came out in the 70s. I'm aware of stuff, It's then you start to hear, okay, it's got this cult following, whatever that is. As a kid, you don't really know what cult following is, but there's the people sing and dance and throw things and ever. The first time I ever knew what was going on in this movie, I think, was Fame, which we're going to talk about, because Fame is another one of these movies that we have to talk about because of the singing and the music and the kitsch value, even though that's more of a serious, dramatic movie at its heart. But there's a scene, they go into the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Fame. So I'm watching Fame, I'm like, this is what's going on, right? Isn't there a scene like that in there, in Fame?
You might be right.
Okay. Well, even if I'm wrong, it was one of those type of situations. It's in another movie where the characters are going to see it and they're talking about it and they're throwing things and everybody's having a fine time. I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then a couple cousins say, oh, they went once, and everybody. And I'm kind of a clean freak in a sense that I don't want people throwing stuff at me, and I don't want to be going to the movies. I guess you wear stuff that you're going to get, stuff on you. Pardon the pun.
It's like a Gallagher show.
Like a Gallagher show, exactly. Anybody who knows that, look it up, all you youngsters.
Oh, the 80s.
Don't be fooled by Gallagher too. No, anyway, I mean, this show's going everywhere. But yeah, so Rocky Horror has this element to it, and now I understand it. It's playing. There's a theater that plays it where I live by the shore. It's in the city.
Interactive.
People go to the city every weekend. They're like, oh, we're going to the city. Okay, I'm not. I'm too young. Nobody's taking me. But it existed like that. Well, in college, they finally released it to home video when we were in college. So I guess that's kind of like 1990, 91 maybe. And I remember renting it. I hate to say this. I feel like I got it. I got my copy of it the night the Gulf War started. So what is that, 91? So
yeah.
Do I watch CNN's coverage of the Gulf War?
Oh, no.
Or do I watch Rocky Horror? Well, I had to fit the two in, and eventually I watched them both. And it's really not a good movie, and that's the point. Everybody knew it wasn't a good movie, but it's been parodied, it's been taken off. Duran Duran did a takeoff of it as Arcadia, and that made me more aware of it too. You've got Barry Bostwick in it. Barry Bostwick is probably a really super talented actor. Susan Sarandon, one of the best actresses of our time, probably. She's just really super talented. And Tim Curry. Who doesn't love Tim Curry? Tim Curry has done almost everything, including, I think he played, what didn't he play, the devil or something in Legend? He was the evil devil creature. Tim Curry is like super talented.
He did the voice of Palpatine after the first voiceover guy died.
After Mr. Pitt died. Yeah, and
Abercrombie.
So anyway, the whole point is, and Meatloaf is in it. The Meatloaf is the monster. So you're watching this thing and you say, oh, I know him. Oh, I know her. And that's Meatloaf. It's like, oh my God. And Richard O'Brien, this was a vehicle for him, and also, a couple other people to get something done. And it probably has this the gay undertones, the transsexual Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, the whole, the straights showing up by accident and it turning into like a sex fest and things like that.
The thing about this movie is that before it came out on video, on VHS, for us that were much younger, it had this mystique about, is it like porn? What is this? Is this weird? Is it a porn musical? What is this?
Charles Gray is in it. He's a Bond bad guy. He played Blofeld, for God's sakes. And so this movie, again, it had a pedigree, but somehow it goes a little off the rails. And it becomes a parody of a B movie almost. And they're winking at you. I mean, literally winking at you from all orifices. This movie has it all. And, I mean, you might not want to sit there and watch with your mom unless she's really cool, which I think my mom probably laughed like you or I would. But in general, it's not, it's not for the faint at heart. You have to appreciate the lifestyle. You have to understand the whole thing. You have to not be turned off by, the themes that are taking place. And when it comes down to it, the songs are awesome. The Time Warp. Who doesn't love that song? Every time they play it at a party, I'm sure everybody's singing and dancing, right? And then just the whole Frankenfooter swinging Sweet Transvestite. Now, who doesn't love that, right? Come on. So anyway, well, I think that's another one people should check out. Unfortunately, you're missing the key ingredient, which is the interactivity, which doesn't really happen anymore. And
not really.
I don't think there's any movies like that anymore. There's group movies when you go see a Star Wars movie or a Twilight movie, everybody's into it and maybe wearing costumes. This was a whole different thing, and very little chance of anything like this happening. Even if they remade it, it wouldn't. They could never recapture that mystique.
Well, once again, let's jump from something that is kind of adult-oriented to something that couldn't be more child-oriented and child-friendly that came a few years before that, and I'm going to say Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
Bugsy
Factory.
Malone? Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Willy Wonka. Again, I'm not a musical guy, but this is the movie that it doesn't bother me one bit, and I love it. I love the fact, they break into songs. It's part of the story. And to me, it almost feels like a Disney movie, like a live Disney movie, but it's not. It's not a Disney movie. It's a completely different animal. And I know it was remade, and I still love the original, more than the remake, even though they had Johnny Depp.
You saw this as a kid?
No, I saw this way later, probably on video, on VHS.
Yeah, I never saw this. The mystique of it, that everybody, there were a lot of people talking about this when I was younger. Willy Wonka, blah, 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 Willy Wonka. Well, I never saw it. Never was interested, never asked to see it, never was offered to see it. I saw it probably maybe 10 years ago, before the remake was done, but
really?
It probably came out on disc or something. And I'm watching it, and I didn't quite get. I understood it, but I didn't quite get what everybody was. I guess it had that whimsical feel of being taken into this world. Well, for me, my whimsy was sci-fi. It was Doctor Who. It was Star Wars. It was Star Trek. So there was no connection for me to say, oh, I want to be in this magical world. No, my magical world has X-Wings in it. This magical world with a Goofus with candy, I guess it just wasn't my thing. But I wound up enjoying it, and I was glad I got to see it. I love Gene Wilder, so it turned out I was glad I got to see another one of it that was new to me. Something from his heyday that wound up being new to me. It wasn't just sitting back and watching something, that I had seen 20 times.
Right.
So it all wound up being fun.
Right. With me, it's kind of like we were just talking about Rocky Horror, how some people connect to Rocky Horror and I cannot connect to it. This movie, I definitely, since the first time I saw it, boom, it actually, it hit me in the ways that I guess people are meant to be hit. And like you said before, when you start to research certain actors and start to, when you start to go through your Gene Wilder phase, through Mel Brooks films, even through Stir Crazy and all his comedies.
Yeah. He had so many eras.
Oh, wait a minute. What's this Willy Wonka thing? This is different. And there it is.
Yeah, it didn't fit a guy like him, but it was brilliant of him to do it because he had done, harder edge stuff with Mel and Richard Pryor. Mm-hmm. He had done some romantic kind of stuff, in his time. This wound up being a nice, fun, classic movie for the ages. It just didn't speak to me.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about, we started with Saturday Night Fever. Why don't we jump to Grease now? Because Grease and Saturday Night Fever, they're almost like brother and sister, those two movies. Like, I always kind of feel that they're together, maybe because they came out around the same time. And how did you feel about Grease, and obviously the sequel that I know you love?
Grease was... The movie Frozen, the way the kids, especially the girls, react to Frozen is the way the girls responded to Grease. And
That's
the way
how you
we
responded
to Star. Well, we respond to Star Wars. The girls kind of responded to Grease, and there was room for everybody in both movies. And I have to say, at first, I knew Grease as the play. But once it had John Travolta, Olivia-Newton-John, the guy from Taxi, the girl, Dee, like there's different people, like you can start saying, oh my God, he's from there, that. Oh, Eve Arden from The Mothers-in-Law, Sid Caesar, Frankie Valli. This is a huge movie. This is turning into like a powerhouse. So I wound up seeing it in the theater, loved it like everybody else, loved the music. Parents loved it because it was kind of their era, at least my father's, and my father's era. My mother could relate to it. She was a little bit younger, but still that was, the kind of thing, going to the dances and the silliness going on. And it kind of was, let's call it innocent fun, even though most of what's going on in the movie is far from innocent.
It's almost like Happy Days. It tries to be very light, but it does sneak in a couple of...
Yes, it basically was Happy Days.
Yeah.
I loved Happy Days. So it was basically a movie musical version of Happy Days in the vein of like American Graffiti.
Right.
Which...
Not serious at all. Not serious at all.
Yeah. And the thing it had was, the interactivity, because once you got that soundtrack, you could be singing it, the guy parts, the girls would sing it. I recall... And I know I did not go to at the time we didn't say that an alternative lifestyle. I didn't go to a gay school. Everybody was singing, like when we had no outdoor activities. Somebody would play the record and everybody in the class would sing.
Well, it's one of those wedding songs. Every wedding you got to play Grease.
Yeah, everybody would sing in the classroom, and that brings a good feeling to me of everybody having fun and remembering, the girls in the class like being into everything. Because I think that was like fourth grade, and fourth grade girls and fourth grade boys generally don't interact too much if they can avoid it, but everybody would have fun together. And then I got to like be friends with girls, other than just these other creatures in the world. It was actually like, oh, maybe I'll have a girlfriend. I like Grease too, Grease as well. Well, I like Grease too also. That's a play on words, kids.
But now tell me about the sequel, because let me first tell you about the sequel, because my exposure to the sequel came as I was actually out of the country. I was traveling out of the country, and I was at a place where I was just bored out of my skull. And a friend of my dad had a huge record collection, and one of the records was Grease 2. So without ever seeing the movie, I kept listening to that record and listening to that record and listening to that record. And then months later, when I was back at my home, I think it was on cable. I actually had a chance to watch it, and wow, it was very different. It was a very different animal than Grease, but it was slightly more modern music, right?
Well, this movie came out in 1982, a week after Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. If that's any indication how this movie fared. That summer was huge. You've done shows on it. Everybody's talked about the summer of 1982.
Oh, it was enormous.
Okay, everything came out that year. And so this movie wasn't up to the challenge of all those movies. And I would have to say, yeah, this is no E.T., this is no Rocky 3, this is no Star Trek. Poltergeist was Tron 82.
It's no Star Trek 3, it's not Star Trek 4.
Yeah, but when it came out, probably later that year or sometime in early 1983 on HBO, oh my God. I can remember, like, the thing about HBO is that I don't think the way things are now, kids especially, there's not that, like, we had nothing else. When you had regular TV and then you had HBO.
Right. HBO was the first stop after the movies.
It was like breaking down the dam, and then suddenly this flood of movies and music and whatever HBO had at the time, would pour into your house. That's how kind of like MTV as well. And I got to tell you, kids, let me tell you. No, I probably saw Grease 2, as did all my friends, so we had something to talk about 100 times. And we knew every stupid song, and A Girl for All Seasons, and Gotta Get Back to School Again. He's a cool rider. This sounds so terrible now as a grown man.
It is.
Singing these songs. But when you watch this movie, it floods back. And I don't mind feeling like I did in 1982. Some of that was a fun time. And this movie helps you because we sang and thought about all this stupidity. It really, think about it. It's Adrian Zmed trying to act tough. Now, Adrian Zed's a good guy and he's funny and he's, on TJ Hooker. But you don't think of a tough guy when you think of Adrian Zmed.
No,
you think of the sidekick or the funny guy.
And what was the guy's name? The lead?
Was it Bachelor Party?
Claude Maxwell or something like that?
Maxwell Caulfield was this, the handsome guy of the month.
Yeah.
And he really was a good-looking guy. A few of the originals came back from, like Eve Arden and Sid Caesar.
And a young Michelle Pfeiffer.
But Michelle Pfeiffer's in it. Michelle Pfeiffer's so hot. And, she's in Delta House, which is the takeoff of Animal House.
Oh.
So you hear of her from that. Then she's in this. And then, holy cow, she's in Scarface. And that's the next year. And it's like, boy, she grew up quick. She went from high school. She went from high school to Elvira in Scarface the next year. But this movie, it didn't kill anybody's career as far as I can tell. I don't think Maxwell Caulfield fell apart. I just don't think he had the meteoric rise that maybe they thought he was going to have. But the guys in the T-Birds, Chris McDonald is in it, okay? Chris McDonald was in the very famous Star Trek episode, Yesterday's Enterprise, okay? And he's Tasha's, whatever she turns out to be, if you remember that episode. And the other guys in the Lorna Luft plays one of the new Pink ladies. That's Judy Garland's daughter. So there's probably a loyalty from Judy Garland's audience who want to follow her, just like Liza has a big following because she's Judy's daughter. But as great as Grease was, this was no Grease. Mm-hmm. However, the music in this does hold up, and it is fun, and it's a fun movie. And again, I keep telling people, don't expect Shakespeare, but please try to watch these because to ignore them, they're part of a time where, people made movies and they didn't come out right, but there's still good stuff in them. And this was a well-made movie. This wasn't made on the cheap. It just didn't come out well.
Let me ask you a question. We talked earlier about Saturday Night Fever, but we didn't really get into its sequel too much. Similar to Grease and Grease 2, with Saturday Night Fever, you got Stallone directing the sequel. You have a continuation of the story. There are musical numbers, just like in Saturday Night Fever, that have to do with dancing, the lead character dancing. But for some reason, I found Staying Alive very cold and very dark and very a negative movie. Like, Saturday Night Fever is fun, and don't get me wrong, there's serious stuff in the movie, but there's an overall fun to it. This one is just him trying to break into the business and getting screwed and people screwing him over, and it's just a nasty movie. What do you think?
Well, Saturday Night Fever is not a fun movie. Saturday Night Fever is a sad movie, actually, and we just had fun remembering it because of all the good music and stuff like that. But by saying that, Saturday Night Fever is more fun because now Tony Manero, from being the good-looking guy who had the dance world, he could do anything when he was dancing. That's not the same Tony Manero we're seeing anymore. Now this is the Tony Manero where life has been tough. He's still dancing. He wants to dance. He has a dream, but it's tough, and he's trying. And where do you dance? You can dance as a stripper. Well, that's not going to be what his mother wants because
he's got to go to Broadway.
My mother had he had to go to Broadway, and that's a tough world to break into. And not a lot of regular non-Broadway, non-actor, non-dancer types really know how tough Broadway is. We all love it, not maybe all of us, but everybody knows that there's talent on Broadway. There's talented people. There's people who work their asses off. But this movie tried to bring that across. And it's not what people wanted. I don't really know what people wanted. Again, I saw this in the theater. This movie is written and directed by Stallone, okay?
Yep.
He's kind of at his height. And he's a talented guy. And he does have a good movie here. He does make a good movie. It just wasn't, it wasn't what people wanted at the time. The songs were more Frank Stallone oriented, even though they were Bee Gees songs. The Bee Gees kind of, again, disco had come and gone. I wouldn't call it, at this point, I guess we were into new wave and rock and pop and stuff. So the Bee Gees style of music that was in Saturday Night Fever is not welcome anymore. So they're trying to make songs that are nice or romantic.
Yeah, it's 80s rock kind of, light rock, I guess, whatever you call powered rock. I don't know what you call it anymore.
Their stuff is really good. The Woman in You. I love there's really Life Goes On. That's a great song. And of course, they do use a version of Staying Alive. But then also the Frank Stallone stuff that he's in it, and he plays like the guy that Cynthia Rhodes winds up. John Travolta's seeing her, but she's in a band with him. And then Finola Hughes, which, oh my God, she's one of my favorites because she's eventually in General Hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And
I had a feeling we were going to end up there somewhere.
She's Anna Devane, and so she wasn't Anna yet, but it's like I can look back on this more fondly now because it's like I hated her at the time. She was so cold, and like you did say, cold, yeah. And it's like she wasn't like you didn't even want him to hook up with her. It's like no. I hope it doesn't work out. I hope Tony doesn't work out. Go stick with the blonde. She's hot. She's sweet. She's nice. This woman's mean. Maybe she can good dance and she's got a nice body. But no, now I see her differently because maybe she's just misunderstood. She's struggling too. She's on top. And when you're on top, everybody wants to throw rocks at you. So anyway, blah, blah, blah.
Let's jump a little bit more because there's only a few more that I want to hit, and one of them is The Wiz, which is obviously it's the remake of The Wizard of Oz, and this is I guess it's described as Motown's take on that story. And granted, the movie wasn't that great, and it's a retelling of The Wizard of Oz, but I remember what was important about this movie was that it was Michael Jackson actually starring in a movie without being super famous like he became a few years later.
Well, the thing is about The Wiz, it's brilliant in their casting.
Diana Ross.
It's brilliant in how they put it together. It's very well made. The thing is, it doesn't hold up. And I don't know why. Can you figure out, like, they recently redid it, and it was very popular on NBC. They did it as one of those
Right, they did a live presentation of it, yeah.
Which every year they're trying to do something like that. They did Peter Pan. Well, The Wiz wound up being well received, where Peter Pan kind of was, made fun of a little bit. But the people involved, like Quincy Jones, this isn't chumps. You said Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Nipsey Russell, Mabel King, Mama, Mabel King is in it. Lena Horne. It's just, there's a lot going on, a lot of talent. It was basically like The Wiz going as if it was,
and it's
the
all
Wizard
Manhattan,
of Oz,
right? It's all in New York City.
Yeah.
In modern New York City. But it's, again, keep in mind, it's late 70s New York City.
But something tells me, this is just off the top of my head, it has nothing to do with any knowledge. It hasn't held up, even though all these people are huge still, because it's basically like the all-black Wiz. And maybe for some reason, even though we respect the talent of all these people because we love these guys, we love their music, we love their work, maybe the general public says, well, we've got The Wizard of Oz. It's got songs. Why do we need The Wiz? It doesn't relate to us, perhaps, or something like that. And I think that's wrong. I think it's overlooked. Sidney Lumet directed it. Joel Schumacher, we know him, Mr. Batman and Nipples. Robin.
Well, it can be that bad if all of a sudden they decided to, like you said, remake it as an NBC live special a few weeks ago. So I guess there's something to it. Again,
I feel like by them redoing it, it kind of like buried this one, where somehow I wish they could have. I think it's out there still, and it's like nobody knows it. But I think like the general public didn't carry it with them all these years as lovingly because, it's just ethnic or something, and the all African American cast, is involved Harlem and stuff. Maybe people don't think of introducing it to their kids in the same way they do the regular Wizard of Oz. So it's too bad.
It's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I've seen it. I like it, but I probably don't think of it that way either. Right. And I don't have kids, so I'm not thinking of, who to show it to either.
Right. Now, the last one I'm going to mention is my third of the favorite ones that definitely I think everybody should take a look at. And again, this is my musicals that I am embarrassed to admit I like because I don't like musicals. Moulin Rouge, which, again, if you describe this movie to me, I would say, no way you are ever going to get me to watch this thing. They sing through the whole movie. It's France. It's this. It's the other. But wait a minute, Ewan McGregor. Wait a minute. I know Ewan McGregor. He's a Star Wars guy, isn't he? And then he sings. And
that's after he's Obi-Wan. So he's already been Obi-Wan at the point that this comes out. And now, to me, thinking about it, I don't even know if he's singing in key. But the song Come What May is a beautiful song. And I listen to it, I quote it, And I really don't know what's going on in the movie. I know he's a writer, a playwriter, and things are struggling, and does it come to him in a dream or something?
It doesn't matter.
I don't remember. It's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. You're right.
Just to see those musical numbers and them singing these modern songs in an older time frame, it's a cool, real combination of how they go back and forth.
Yeah, this is a movie that it's a little tough for the average guy, the average working guy, let's say, to jump in and say, yeah, I love it. Baz Luhrmann is known for his, showy shows, showy movies. More recently, he redid, the Gatsby's. Yeah. And it was
he did Romeo and Juliet, one of the remakes of Romeo and Juliet.
Love the original Gatsby's. This one was a little busy for me, but it had an all-star cast. John Leguizamo's in it, Jim Broadbent in it.
I love the soundtracks. Like I said, like Saturday Night Fever, I bought those soundtracks. I love both of the soundtracks.
I took the song. I didn't buy the soundtrack. Let's not get carried away there. But, you've got everybody. You've got David Bowie involved in it, and, I can't explain how good this stuff is without, again, then suddenly it's winning me over.
And Nicole Kidman, she's the other lead that she also, I believe, sings some of the songs.
It's re-winning me over, but while I'm thinking about it, but Come What May is a beautiful song.
It sure is.
And at the very least, check out that song. If you like David Bowie, there's a couple of songs there from him just for fun. And if you're prepared for a showy performance from everybody and a little colorful performance, shall we say, then you'll have a fun time.
It's different. It's not very realistic. It's very different. It's an unusual acting style. I can't even describe it. You have to see it. They do take themselves seriously, but it's very comedic or cartoonish how they act. And it works. It works perfectly for this movie.
Yeah, we might have to do a sequel to this episode because things will come to our mind. Yes. People will start writing in and maybe saying, well, you forgot about this one.
Yeah, you forgot this one, you forgot that one. We'll say that ourselves.
Yeah, I think the point is movies that aren't quite musicals but aren't quite serious. And, it's like we could be talking about Oklahoma and The King and I. Of course, they were all
that's
classics.
A normal musical,
but that's a different kind of thing. This is people who are our childhood heroes like John Travolta or our Star Wars heroes like Ewan McGregor or, talented people who somehow wind up in this bizarre world of, of song and dance. And it always seems to have a tinge of, bad to it. But you wind up, after you think about it and you watch, you say, I kind of liked it. Or you sing a song or two for a couple days afterwards and say, geez, maybe it wasn't so bad. It made me laugh or it made me smile.
Right. And this isn't also, like you were saying, things like Oklahoma. This is also not Disney because, Disney has a huge tradition of musical numbers within their films.
That's a different kind of thing, too.
So that's a whole other animal, too. But I definitely agree with James about this could turn into a future episode of additional movies that are in this vein that they're worth taking a look at. If you like soundtracks and that sort of thing, when the actual actors are involved or the characters are the ones involved in what's happening musically in the actual film. So I want to first of all thank James as usual for joining me today on this very different subject matter, and thank you guys for taking the time to listen to us, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
John Travolta, Olivia-Newton John, Grease, the Broadway smash that made theatrical history by becoming one of the longest-running musical comedies of all time, breaks loose on the motion picture screen. John Travolta, the sensational star of Saturday Night Fever, ignites the screen in Grease. And he does it all with Olivia-Newton John in her motion picture debut.
What's the matter with you? Let me read something to you. stayed out under the dark. We stayed out till 10 o'clock. Summer fling don't mean a thing, but I know the summer night.
I get so many hickeys, people will think I'm a leper.
Hey, cheer up. Hickey from Kanicki's like a Hallmark card.
You pig.
I love it when you talk dirty.
John Travolta and Olivia-Newton-John explode across the motion picture screen in Grease, the movie filled with more song, more dance, more of everything that makes a great musical unforgettable. John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John together for the first time in Grease.
Thanks, John Travolta. I liked it as much as Star Wars.
No way you are ever going to get me to watch this thing.
Literally winking at you from all orifices.